You know, I'm always amazed sometimes at how the lectionary is put together, because it always seems to fit with what we are doing. Also, I like the lectionary because every few years it allows me to preach on certain scriptures that I really appreciate. So this week we're going to talk about the 38th chapter of Job. And if you guys remember the story of Job, we're not going to read that, Ray. But I'm going to reference that. But if you want to turn in your Bibles, the Bible is the thing in your pew that says Bible on it. I know we don't get those out very often. But if you want to turn to Job, also titled Job, and it's in the Old Testament, and turn to the 38th chapter. Okay, that's what I'm going to be referencing. And it kind of talks about the mystery of God, which I want to talk about, which I think is also going to be a topic of when we talk about a new vision for the church and what that means about the mystery of God. But also because as Christians, we get faced with questions all of the time, especially when we turn on the news and you see of all the tragedy happening in our world. We always are like, well, where is God? What is going on? Why is there so much suffering? Why did my brother die? Why did my parents have cancer? Why did my spouse leave me? You know, whatever answer or questions we have, life hurts and it's tough and it's hard. And we always have these questions for God and want to say, why is this happening to me? And all of the time, especially being Christians, you know, we are hopeful. We're like, well, we have God by our side and something good's going to come out of this. I have God by my side, so there's going to be healing somehow. Somehow we have this hope. And then as the tragedy continues and it gets worse and it gets darker, a lot of us are left with this let down feeling. Like, I thought God was going to show up, but now all of a sudden I'm still hurting and I'm painful, and we have this hope and then we're let down. And all we are left with is silence and mystery, right? So when we face those hard times of life, sometimes we are faced with not knowing what to do with it, not knowing how to answer it, and silence. Now, silence on the part of there's nothing going on, but also we feel a silence that we believe comes from the very throne of God sometimes. It feels like, where is God? Because life is messy. You know, and I say that all of the time, but we can't contain life. From the big things of the cancer and the deaths in our lives to little things of just letting us know that things happen with no reason. You know, like, so for two things, simple things. Like, one, we can think about how life is messy in a fun way. Like I remember when Eden had to be maybe 3 or 4 years old, she was sitting there and she wanted to have a makeover for me. So I'm like, okay, I was watching something on television and she painted my nails and she's fixing it. Well, this was also the time I was on the fire department. So at that moment, my pager went off and I had to go on a fire call. Well, I forgot that my nails were painted and I had other things attached to me. Well, you know, luckily they knew that I had a daughter, but I'm saying even something as silly as that has no pain, no nothing, it's just the messiness of life. Like sometimes it bleeds out into other things that we do, right? Or like last night I was thinking of this, I have a Band-Aid on my finger and I had made a fire last night and kind of just wanted to be by myself. So I took a piece of wood and a box cutter and I do a lot of artwork and things like that. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to whittle a sculpture. And I'm whittling away, not paying attention, and then I look down and my whole hand is bloody, right? Because the razor blade cut off the little bit of my finger. Well, just cut it. It's not bad at all. But it's bleeding, and I'm walking into the kitchen, and it's dripping blood, and I'm like, Eden, go get Amanda, because for some reason, I'm tough, right? But when it comes to my own blood, I pass out. Okay, so I'm sweating and I'm like, just go get Amanda. Amanda comes out, and of course, I'm sure Eden tells her I'm bleeding, so she thinks my arm's cut off, and it's just like a little paper cut. But I kept thinking about how life, one minute you're just sitting there, minding your business, doing something, and the next minute you're bleeding because life just happens. And I know that is simple, and it's not as big as somebody dying or cancer or any of that. but it still is along that spectrum of from the little things to the big things. Life gets out of control sometimes, and we get frustrated, especially when we are hurting, especially when we deal with the loss of loved ones or sickness or marital problems or child problems. We get frustrated, and as we all know, and I do a lot of marriage counseling, so I know this is true, just like in Amanda and I's life, is that when we get frustrated, we have a habit of taking it out on those that are closest to us, those that love us the most. We start yelling at or screaming at because we're frustrated. And it's no different with God. When I get frustrated with God, when I don't know, we want to yell, "Where are you, God? What are you doing, God? Why aren't you helping me, God?" And Job is no different. Job, which is one of the oldest stories we have in the Bible, of this story of this competition between God and the devil, or however you want to word that, God and the adversary, and Job, this good Christian, all of a sudden has his life ripped out from him. His family killed, his livestock taken, everything was lost. So his friends and him are trying to make sense of this and ask these questions that can't be answered. What am I supposed to do? Where are you, God? And Job comes from that question like a lot of us do. We come from it, as Barbara Brown Taylor would say, Job comes from the question of justice, meaning from that mentality that all of us have, that if I am good, if I follow God, if I am a believer, nothing bad's going to happen to me. But if I do bad things and treat people awful, then bad things are going to happen. I'm going to be punished. So Job's sitting there going, what in the world did I do? I'm a follower of God. I was a good disciple. I was a good husband and father and all of this, and now look at what happened, and is left with these questions. What do I do with this? So again, Job starts to question and ask God, and life gets out of the way, and all that was left was Job to sit there with ashes and sackcloth and just be in the silence and say, I don't know what's going on here. So then Job decides, well, nobody's given me the answer. I'm going to question God. I'm going to ask God, Lord, why are you doing this? Why is this happening? Why am I hurting? Why is life not going my way right now? So Job challenges God. Answer me, God. I don't know about you, but even though we may not verbalize that, we ask that in our head all of the time. Answer me, God. Tell me why I'm dealing with. Tell me why I'm hurting. I've devoted my life to you. I did this, I did that. Why am I suffering, God? It's tough. It's messy. So Job asks. And this is one of the places where a lot of people lose faith. When tragedy hits their life, when bad things happen and they don't know where to go, or they are left with no other options other than to blame God, people walk away from faith. So I've shared a little bit about how in my history there was abuse and struggles and all of that. Well, we grew up in a church that told us that God dictated everything, that comes from a predetermined idea that God has all the days of my life planned out. Before I was born, knew exactly what was going to happen. God knew that I was going to nick my finger yesterday as I was carved, like that everything is planned out. So when you have that kind of theology that I had, so when the abuse came and my brother came out and said, this is what's been going on, I had nowhere to go other than to blame God. I had nowhere to go other than to say, God did this, God allowed this, God made this happen, and now I'm upset. And because nobody ever taught me about questioning God or sitting in the mystery of God or asking questions, I had nowhere else to go, so I left the church. So I was a freshman in college, and I said, I want nothing to do with this God. I want nothing to do with religion anymore, because I didn't have any answers. So I left. And for about that summer, I literally changed my college application, or whatever you want to call it, and switched schools to become a history teacher, because I wanted nothing to do with God. I was left with not knowing what to do with that mystery. So that's what I've been asking myself all of these years, in the 20 years I've been doing ministry, of saying, what do we do with the silence? What do we do with the questions? And all I can come up with is, and all that I can think about when I read, is that people will say that you enter into it, right? And I'm like, what in the world does that mean, enter into it? Right? What do you mean enter into the suffering or enter into the mystery or the questions? And I think, as far as my little head can comprehend, right, I think it's though when we finally say, all right, Lord, I need to let it go and let you be God, and I need to go look for God and pay attention. So that verse in Psalm 46:10 that says, be still, listen, pay attention. Go searching for God. Enter into this and say, all right, Lord, this sucks right now and it hurts, but somehow I'm going to go find you. And it's not going to take care of the issues. When I enter into these questions or the frustrations or yelling at God, the issues are still there. I'm still going to have to deal with all of those things. But as we encounter and find God along the way, God answers and shows up. And now we can continue to go on. Because this whole part of the 38th chapter of Job, if you look at it, right, it's one of my favorite passages, right? And I know John Dillon always tells me I have a lot of favorite passages. He's not here today. But, because I always say this is one of my favorite, but it's one of my top 5. And I love it because I always put myself where Job is, thinking I know everything and I have these answers. And I'm like, God, answer me. God, answer me. And I love it. God shows up. God's like, who is this that questions me with things I know nothing about? Who is it that is questioning me? And he even tells Job, if you read in there, he even tells Job, get ready, Job. You better pull your pants up because I'm about to tell you what's happening. Right? I think it says you better gird yourself up. Right? Because I'm going to speak. And then God goes on for, I believe, 2.5 chapters. God goes on and says, Job, were you there when I put the planets in motion? Were you there when I painted the flowers? Were you there when I dug out the oceans? Were you there when I put the animals on the mountaintop? Were you there, Job? If you were there, and he questions Job, and he says, Job, if you were there when I did all of this, then you answer me. You tell me. So again, going back to that Barbara Brown Taylor where she says Job was concerned about justice, she said God's answer was about omnipotence. And she says that this is the only place in the entire Bible that she can remember or believes that God showed up and allowed people to know why people suffer. And what did God say? I'm God, you're not. That's it. That's all we have. I'm God, you're not. So let me be God. But how tough is that to live within the mystery? But again, I think the power in this story, like life, is not found, in the answers. It's found in the struggle. It's found in the journey, the struggle to find and see God in the chaos. Struggle to find God in the midst of the pain. I always think about, after we make it through something tough, it's like one of those scenarios where, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but have you ever read the stories of where a car fell on a little kid and this little 90-pound mother decides that she's going to pick the car up off of the kid? And there's documented cases where the adrenaline and the fear and everything caused that 90 to 100-pound woman to literally lift a car up enough that the kid can be pulled out. Right? I mean, there's things, all of that. Or you go through something, all of a sudden somebody's like, wow, do you realize what you just did? You made it. Look behind you and see what you just overcame. That's exactly what we do. Right? It may not be quite like that, or that situation, but we make it through and we can look back and say, I don't know how that happened. I had a lot of questions, but somehow God ventured with me. God was here. And I also like it because right before God answers in the 38th chapter of Job, it says that God answered out of a whirlwind, right? And I was looking up what whirlwind meant, especially in the Hebrew language, and it meant not at home, right? So Job was uncomfortable. Job did not feel at home. Job was in the presence of God at that moment, and God said, here I am. God answered Job. And I love it because just like Job, we all think we have the answers. We all think we are here or we have figured it out, that we know more than God, but we don't. There are things that we can't explain. And I want you to write this down this morning if you have a pen. And I don't know, I'll be honest, I do not know if I came up with this idea or I read it somewhere, okay? So put down like John possibly, okay? That's my problem when you read too much. I can't remember all the time where I read these things. But it said faith is where we go when we have no words. Think about that. Faith is the place we go when we have no words. So when I don't have the answers, when I can't figure out why something is happening, when I am hurting and in pain, when I turn on the news and I see our world hurting, when I see children being ripped away from their parents, when I went home this week to see my father and see how family still deals with the brokenness of what has happened, or deaths, or I go into hospital calls, all of these things, when there are no words, we are left with faith. We are left with this acknowledgement that says, I do not know how, but somehow God is here. I do not know how this is going to work out, but I do know that somehow God's going to walk with me and through this journey. There are no answers to these things in life, but we do know that we have a God that walks with us. So despite the pain and the hurt, despite the answers, we find comfort. So how do we find comfort? How does that happen? One, I don't know, because again, it's the mystery of God. But I believe that we find comfort because we encounter God along the way. We encounter God along the way. And when you encounter God, you can't help but to be changed. You can't help but to be touched. So all of these things that have happened in my life, all of these things that have happened in your lives, the messiness, the chaos, the hurts, the pain, all of it, while we may not have answers and we may not know how we came through it, somehow we have encountered God, and that gave us enough power to continue our journey. That is what this is about. That we can't explain it because it can't be explained, but we know that God is with us. But I love that imagery. I love it. And I can just picture, I want to do a painting of this little person standing before something huge, and all of a sudden out of the silence you hear. And I love it because maybe it speaks to the New Yorker in me of just wanting to just tell people sometimes they're full of it, right? But Job's standing there, and instead of God showing up and God saying, I love you, Job, and everything's going to be okay, and let me pat you on the back and hug you, God shows up and says, Job, you don't know what you're talking about. Job, get ready, because I have something. You're going to question me. I have questions for you. Who is this that darkens my door with things they know nothing about? How many times do I knock on God's door with a list of saying, you're going to do this, and it better be this way? And then God answers the door and just laughs at me. It'll be okay, John, but that's not happening. I got my own ways. Can we live within the silence and the mystery? One of the ways that and again going back to the visioning team, one of the ways that I think that we can be a difference maker in this community is to be a place where instead of giving the answers, instead of telling people what to do or what to think, we can allow people to come and just be in the silence and mystery of God, saying, we don't have it all figured out, but we're all on the same journey. That we can all come here and say, we do not know, but we know God is going to show up. You know, my job as a pastor is not to give you answers. Your job as a church is not to provide answers for everybody. It's to provide space to encounter God. It's about providing space so that people can figure out what is going on with their life. Not that I'm going to shove something down their throat and say, this is how it is, because then we're going to have God say, John, shut up. I'm bigger than that, right? So we provide space and say, I don't know, I'm broken too. Why don't you just come journey with us? I don't know how this is going to happen, but let's read together, study together, figure this out together. Let's just cry together. Be in the mystery, because that's all that life is. We do not know, but I know that I have a God that picks up the slack. So let us pray. Lord, again, I don't know what I'm talking about. And I just pray that you can help us to be still and listen to your words. How can we talk about mystery when it's a mystery? So Lord, wherever we may find you this morning, whether we are content, whether we are hurting and broken, whether we have questions or we are okay where we are, help us to know that you are God, that you are the one that dug out the oceans and hung the sun in the sky, and that you will walk with us in this life, as messy as it can be, because we know that you are God. And all of God's people said, amen. If you'll please stand as we close this.